Hey, welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who will multiply value to others. My name is Mark Cole, and I feel a little bit like John Maxwell, to be honest with you. Every time John Maxwell writes a book, when it's releasing, he goes, "This is my best book ever." We kind of all laugh and go, "Yeah, okay, we've heard that before." But today I kind of feel like John Maxwell because I think this is going to be one of the best podcasts ever. By the way, John says that the day that he quits writing a book that he does not feel like is the best book ever, he's going to quit writing. So the day I don't feel like I'm bringing you the best podcast we've ever had to date is the last days of the podcast. So just be encouraged when I say today is one of the best podcasts ever. And that's because today my friend and John Maxwell's friend, Ron Simmons, is in studio with us. Now I'll let you get to meet Ron in just a moment. We'll talk more about Ron. But Ron has had many years of leadership experience in corporate space and government. He shares some of the most important lessons he's learned in his life and his leadership in a brand new book. In fact, if you're watching by YouTube, and by the way, you should, because Ron is here together with me live, he talks about in his new book, Life Lessons from the Little Red Wagon. 15 ways to take charge and create a path to success. Now, you're going to love this. We're going to talk a little bit about the Red Wagon, but you, our listeners, should also be excited about this book because our very own Maxwell Leadership Thought Leader, Don Yaeger, worked on this book with Ron. John did the foreword. We're going to talk about something unique about John in the audiobook of this in my interview with Ron. And we all know when Ron, Don, and John, that sounds pretty good. When these guys get together, they will tell a great story. So we're going to hear from Ron. You're going to hear why John is so excited. But before we get going and before we really talk about the book, Ron, first I got to tell you thank you. Thanks for being in the room with me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and where all of it happens here.
It all happens
under your leadership, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your leadership. I know I speak for John in that too.
Yeah, it does. It all happens here. We have a studio in Florida, but when we're in Atlanta, this is it. But we could have done this by Zoom, but he jumped on a plane. Podcast listeners jumped on a plane, came in today, leave tonight or tomorrow, just to be in here and be a part. And I know, Ron, this is your first book.
Right.
And
so it's my best book for sure.
It's your first.
No question, folks. It's my best book ever.
And we're not going to the other extreme.
Question.
That it's your worst book. No. Let's don't go there. It's the best book ever. But let me say this. It's not the book. It's not even selling the book. It's not even the idea of the book selling millions and gazillions of copies that made you get on a plane. Your life has all been all about serving others. So before we even get to the book, tell me about this Ron Simmons guy, because I want your podcast listeners to know this. If there's anybody that John has lunch with, he and Margaret Maxwell, if there's anybody that John has dinner, lunch, plays golf with more in life on a consistent basis than Ron Simmons, I don't know who it would be. And there's a reason why why John Maxwell and Ron Simmons sits down every summer, because they are up together in Highlands, North Carolina, or every fall because we go out to Pebble Beach, or every other time in the year when we just kind of can get our paths to cross. And that's because when John and Ron get together, leadership happens. Discussions happen, and that's because, Ron, you have spent your life serving others in leadership. Let us hear, before we hear about Ron the author, let us hear about Ron the leader. Tell us a little bit about your life, some of the accomplishments you've had.
Well, I tell people all the time, and no offense to our listeners from Arkansas and Louisiana, but I was born in Louisiana, raised in Arkansas. So you got some of the issues already going against you. Got to Texas fast as I could spell it at about age 25. But I think what I've always wanted, I was a middle child. Yeah. And I think sometimes middle children have this desire to succeed and to gain attention. I can see it in our little grandkids already.
Yeah.
And so I think that was part of it innate with me. And then I also saw some of the challenges that my own family went through, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit later.
Yep.
And something inside of me said, I don't want to be a part of that. Okay. I loved sports at the time. And so I was the captain of our football team in high school. I thought that was a place that I could lead by example. And that's something that I always wanted to do, was lead by example. You know, when you're a young guy, you don't really have the ability to get to level 5 because you don't know. In fact, you shouldn't be on level 5.
Yeah.
You should really focus trying to get to level 3, right?
Yep.
Where you're just doing it. You're going to get performance, right? And so that's where I've kind of always started, Mark, is that I think a real leader, you could skip level 1 for sure. The title doesn't mean anything. If you can get to level 3 and you can perform, then people will at least take notice to you. And then it'll be up to you how much you've developed internally to where or not they will be willing to follow you. And then you'll be able to develop leaders that develop other leaders.
Yeah.
And so what I've done along the way, I did this in business. I created an investment company that at the time we sold it, managed $3 billion under management. We had clients in all 50 states. Again, I took 10 years to get 4 years of college, so I'm not the smartest guy in the room. But the way I did that is people saw me doing it. I brought in the first $400 million worth of assets that we managed. And so everybody knew that Ron had already been there from the mailroom all the way up to the CEO spot. And it was the same way when I entered the legislature. And when I entered the legislature, I was a 51-year-old guy that hadn't really ever done politics. I was focused on my business and my family. But when I got in there, what I did, the first thing I did is I went and met with all 149 other members of the legislature.
I love this.
It took me 70 days to do it, but I did it. And because I wanted them to see me willing to go out and do the work. And so I always started, my leadership deal was do the work and then develop yourself, and you'll be able to develop others.
Leaders, you know better than anyone that growth is essential if you want to make tomorrow better than today. But fitting growth into your calendar takes intentionality and self-discipline. So let Maxwell Leadership help make your growth achievable. You're invited to join thousands of worldwide leaders in using the Maxwell Leadership Growth Plan. The Maxwell Leadership Growth Plan provides you with convenient and easy to implement leadership resources, including video lessons from John Maxwell, all at your fingertips. Available in our Maxwell Leadership app or online, you'll be coached by many well-known leadership experts that will help you achieve your growth goals. You can even listen to this podcast right there in the app. Check it out for free today at growth.maxwellleadership.com. That's growth.maxwellleadership.com.
So, built your own business, $3 billion plus under management, served in the state house of the country of Texas. Yes, I did say that correctly.
So. That's right.
Very, very effective. I know people that talk about the job that you did serving the great state of Texas very often. Very involved in helping others get what they want, be very successful. And then there's this component of an incredible family. If you don't know this, he married way above himself.
That's
Lisa Simmons is absolutely made you everything that you are.
No question about it.
But incredible family, and you've just been very involved in the community. And you've just made a way with your leadership to be effective at whatever you do coming from a leadership angle. Would that be accurate?
Well, I've tried to do that for sure. And, you know, Mark, the other thing is that I wanted to do, and a lot of families are like this, okay? And my mom and dad were good people. My dad's still alive. My mom passed away a couple years ago. They had some struggles. They divorced when I was 17 and had their own issues. But it doesn't mean there's a lot of people that happens to, 50% of the country that happens to, right? But I will say that what that did to me is I wanted to lead my family, first of all, okay? The goal that I had, Lisa and I talked about a bunch, was that, first of all, I wanted to get out of financial mediocrity.
Yeah.
We can talk about that some more later. But then and the reason for that is that if Lisa and I started down here at the bottom, okay, wherever it was, and there were certainly people worse off than we were, but we could see them, right? We could shake hands with them, right? And I wanted, wherever we got to, that's where I wanted the starting point. Not in money, okay? I want to make sure that I leave them an inheritance, but mainly I want it to be in a level of understanding and influence and character so that they could go from there and take that to wherever it is that leads them. That was really important for Lisa and I.
Well, you've done that. And again, those of you that have not had a chance to meet Ron, you're going to meet him with the book. The story here is incredible. I can't wait to get to it. But this is a leader that understands how to set people up, whether it's financially, whether it's politically, whether it's business, and set people up for success. So thanks for all you've done, and thanks for being such a friend to John and I. I want to get into this book, but before I do, one of the things I love about great leaders like John Maxwell, like Ron Simmons, is you have this huge passion to reinvent yourself. John, most recently, those on the podcast, you know, John just released his book. That's why it took me so long to get this interview to you. We just released John's book. John just released some songs because he's writing songs now. He's constantly reinventing himself. And Ron, you are too. You didn't set out to be an author. Why did you say, I've got to get my book, my story in print?
For me, I think there was two things for it. Obviously, I think leaving a legacy for your children in words is important.
Yeah.
Right? And now that we have grandchildren, I think that's important. In fact, if only my 6 grandchildren read it, would be okay with me, right? That would be really good. It's kind of like John, his mother read his first book, right?
Yes, exactly.
I know exactly how that is. But even more so than that, if you look at my life, okay, there's a lot of people out there like me, Mark, okay, whether they grew up in a small town with 50 people in their graduating class, or whether they grew up in maybe a bad area of a major city, that all the stuff on top of them that would say you can't, would definitely be a reason for them not to. And I wanted to show that they can, okay?
Right.
Now, obviously, I'm like John and you, I'm a person of faith. And so it wasn't me doing this all along.
Sure.
God had his hand on us, but he also, as we could tell throughout the Bible, he depends on us. We are people of free will to make the choice and to decide whether or not we go down that road or we go down this road.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk about this. Life lessons from the Little Red Wagon. All right, tell our listeners, tell our viewers, what's the concept of the Red Wagon, and how is that going to make me a better leader?
Yeah, well, that's a good. It's funny. This is something that came to me years ago. The whole Red Wagon. I had an incident which I talk about in the book where I had a little bit of an accident on my first Red Wagon when I was 6 years old that I still actually have a scar under my chin for. And I was just developing this process of thinking about the parts of the wagon here a few years ago. And when you think about a wagon, okay, it really, first of all, unless it's facing downhill, can't go anywhere on its own. And if it is facing downhill and there's nobody leading it, it's going to crash. And so when I looked at it, I thought the wagon has all the components that we have in life. Yeah. You have to have somebody on the handle, okay? And it's the only one that can do the direction. You have to have the front wheels because the front wheels actually allow it to move, okay?
Yep.
But you also, and they determine where the back wheels go. The back wheels only go where the front wheels go. That's all they do. And then, of course, the actual container itself is where we carry everything, or where we're being carried. Sometimes we're the ones being carried.
Yeah, for sure.
And at different points in my life, I've been in all aspects of that.
So then in the book, and this is what I love, you have 15 ways to actually begin, not just driving behavior and not just going along with the wagon wherever it goes, but you give ways that we can take charge, that we can actually take responsibility for the way that our life, our red wagon is going. Talk a little bit about how you wanted to show in your story how you might be that passenger sometime, but just stay there because you're going to be able to take charge and take control of your life.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the first thing that I tell people is that you need to realistically determine where you are in the wagon in each phase of your life.
Well,
and I look at things like relationships, your spiritual, your faith, your finances, your job, all of those things. Where are you? Because I'm not going to be on the handle on every one of those. If you think you are, then it's kind of like when I took Allie hunting one time and we didn't catch anything. We didn't kill anything. And she says, I said, well, honey, that's why we call it hunting. And she says, I call this a nature walk, right? You're just on a nature walk if you think you're, on the deal the whole time. So it was really important to me to be able to look at where was I at different times in my life. At 51 years old, after I'd already been CEO of a very large investment company, I got in that wagon and somebody else had to carry me on how to be involved in public service.
Wow.
And if I would have tried to pull the wagon on that itself, I would have lost. I just would have lost because it's different enough that you have to be willing to say it's okay to be in the wagon sometimes.
It's what John says. I love this, Ron. I love this. It's what John says is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong class, right?
Yes.
And the other day he was talking about writing books and he says, I found out that I was the dumbest person in the room, and I don't want to stay there either. If you're constantly pulling the wagon and you're not relying on others to help you and pull you, you're probably not trying something bigger than yourself. If you don't need somebody in your life helping you get your wagon where it needs to go, then you're probably not trying enough. Or if you're constantly being pulled, you're probably not helping others.
Yeah, you're probably not learning enough yourself. You don't want to be cargo forever.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So as a 16-year-old, I loved reading. Really, it was about 14 or 15, and I loved reading Westerns. Louis L'Amour, you remember that?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Max Brand.
Yeah. Oh,
remember
yeah.
Louis L'Amour, Max Brand, the Sackett brand?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
So I did too. So I would spend many, many nights. And so one of the things that I love is the part in the book about the Lonesome Dove.
Ugh.
Okay,
greatest miniseries of all time.
So I want you to share that story, and I want you to help us tie it into our willingness to learn.
Well, there's a story in there. It's a couple of different stories in there, okay? But the story that I like the most involves the one with Jake Spoon, okay?
Okay.
And Jake Spoon was one of their former Texas Ranger colleagues. And Jake had gone off to gamble and all this type of stuff while they were down in this little hick town and, trying to raise some cattle and all that stuff. And Jake shows up one day and says, hey, we ought to, take this herd to Montana. That's where they say everything's beautiful up there. And they look at Jake kind of like he's crazy and all that. But long story short, they decide to do that. Well, Jake only lasts for a few days, and he wants to go back to San Antonio and gamble, which is just a little ways up the road. All right. And so when he gets there and kind of runs out of money, he has to hook up with some guys to kind of get him through the Badlands.
Yeah.
And he hooks up with some guys that are really bad guys. And these guys end up killing some farmers and stuff along the way. And Gus, okay, and Call, who were the two main characters,
right.
Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones, which were made for this movie, they find out about some bad people that have killed some farmers, okay? And they hear about it. Of course, they have a sense of justice. Even though they're not Texas Rangers anymore, they got to go take care of it. So they leave the herd and run off. Well, sure enough, Jake Spoon's with them. Now, Jake hadn't killed anybody, but he's with these bad guys, and he tries to explain once Gus and Woodrow get there, hey, I didn't do anything. It was these guys. I was just trying to get through there. And I'll never forget, they had him on the horse with the rope around their neck. And he said, but Gus, I didn't do anything. And Gus says, Jake, you crossed the line, son. And Jake said, I didn't see no line. And that's what happens, okay? Oh. That's what happens in life. I didn't even see a line. Mm-hmm. And so we're not focused enough on what's going on around us to be able to know when things might be going the wrong way and you need to pivot, right?
Yep.
And so that's one of the stories I like. There are multiple stories in there.
Yeah.
We talks about, it ain't talking about dying. I'm talking about living. It's really
well, I love this. And I so related with the Jake Spoon, because the Mark Cole in life, not realizing the components and all the really necessary things of life, the components of the Red Wagon, and not realizing that. I can find most of the time, Ron, perhaps this is true in your leadership, most of the time that I get errant, that I lose my way, that I make some what feels like fatal mistakes, although they've ended up helping me build something, has been because I didn't realize that others around me could help me get on the journey. And that's what I love about the Jake story is he didn't realize that he didn't have that blind spot. He didn't realize that he had crossed the line. He didn't see the line in the story.
He crawled in the wagon.
Yeah.
And didn't think beyond the wagon.
That's right.
And he actually left. If you remember, he left the lady behind and a good little friend of his, Newt. Remember, Newt was his good friend.
Yep.
And they were very sad when he went off, right? Because he felt he had abandoned him. Lori Darling was the lady. And so he should have been another component of that. He should have at least been the rear wheels of that journey.
No doubt about it.
Pushing.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to crawl in the wagon.
All right. So what's first book?
Yeah.
Which one of these chapters was the hardest to write?
The one about Daniel.
Yeah.
You know, we have a middle son who has autism and some other struggles, seizure disorder and all that type of stuff. And the challenges that we had with him, not internally as much, but just with other people were the ones that were the hardest. They were the ones that were the most difficult because you hurt for him. You know, you have children.
Yep.
You just hurt for them, right?
Yep.
And so that was the hard. We've seen a lot of victories in that too, but it was those that was. And when my audio book comes out, which will be out in a few weeks, it's interesting because they asked me when I went back to make a few corrections on the recording. They said, you know, you were pretty emotional in this chapter. Do you want to go back and re-record that? And I said, absolutely not, because that's who we are. That's who we were. So that was probably the hardest one to write.
It was a beautiful one. Most of everybody that listens to the podcast or have been listening for a while knows of my mentally, physically handicapped brother, Philip. Mm-hmm. And so reading that about Daniel and just watching you be raw on that was very helpful. And for you as podcast listeners that, man, you know, when John and I bring you a book recommendation, you know that it is going to impact you. I'll tell you, some of you are dealing with, you might not have Daniel, you might not have Philip, but you have situations, lives in your life that is impacting your leadership. And watching how you and Lisa and how you specifically began to let that be a part, a welcome part of your wagon was very inspiring and impacting to me, who's also lived a life that others. Okay, you wrote this chapter called Create Your Opportunity. Mm-hmm. And most people, they think of the notion of opportunity actually as something you find rather than you create. So talk to us a little bit about this concept in the book.
Well, there's also a pretty good story in there. And of course, really, if you like stories, you really got to read this book. Yeah. I'm not that great of a storyteller, but I come across very good here. I think I'm pretty good when you're talking to me, but I couldn't do it the way Don helped me do it. He was just so inspirational in that. And so there's a sports metaphor in there in this particular chapter, because we talk about Eddie Malone and myself. Mm-hmm. Well, Eddie Malone was our star running back in high school. I mean, he was the prototype 6'2", really fast guy. And we're running this drill where it'd be like at this table right here. Well, I'm coming up this line, he's up that line, and whoever meets in the middle, that's who you're going to go against. 1-on-1, no blockers in between. Yep. And I'm thinking, I'm like 160 pounds. He's like 220 pounds and just a rock. And I'm thinking, I could die today, right? I literally could die today at age 16. But I said, okay, you got to create your own opportunity. I mean, I wasn't thinking that, but I said, I'm going to do my very best right here, because I didn't like not being a starter. As a sophomore, I didn't start. Okay, right. I got in some games, but I wasn't a starter. So we went at it head to head, and I won. Now, he may not have been going full speed thinking I'm going to run over him. He's not going to be that big. But I will tell you what happened then is the coach picked me up by the back of my jersey, which they used to be able to do. You probably can't do that these days. And he said, this is my starting middle linebacker right here. Wow. And the confidence, Mark, I will tell you, the confidence that put in me at that time has led me through life. And that sounds small. I mean, because we were a small school, wasn't anything special about us, but the confidence. And so that just tells you, too, that how we affect others, but taking that opportunity, right? And then taking the opportunity in business of saying, my name's not Murphy. I worked at Murphy Oil in El Dorado, and so I knew there was a glass ceiling, and so I wanted to be able to create my own. So that's why we moved to Dallas and looked for other opportunities, and then eventually set out on our own. So we'll come back and let you make a couple of closing comments, but before we run out of time, believe powerfully in the power of mentorship. Yes. And what roles John's for me and others like you have played in my life. I'm rich
because of the people, the relationships, the people that's helping you. You wrote this chapter that says, seek out mentors and get unstuck.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the role of mentors and what you need to look for in mentors so they can help you.
Yeah, and I think for me, it may have been because of my father and my relationship when I was younger wasn't as good as it should be because of some of the challenges. And so for whatever reason, I've always sought people that knew more than me in a particular area. And one of the things I also want to caution people on, Mark, is that don't have one mentor for all your areas of life, okay? You could have a business mentor that certainly might not be your spiritual mentor. Now, they need to have a similar world outlook and faith outlook, but they may be different. So what I encourage people to do is, again, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, is to go out and find people. And what you will find is that people want that. My son-in-law came to me yesterday. We have Sunday night dinners. I guess it was Sunday night. And he said, hey, I'm having dinner with the former CEO of the organization I'm working with, having lunch with him. What should I do? And I said, first of all, people love to do that because he had asked for it. My son-in-law had asked for it, which I was proud of him for doing that. And I said, have 3 or 4 questions written down. That's what John taught us that. I said, don't have 20 like you used to do with Coach Wooden, but have a few. And then just ask him questions about himself and then ask him questions about how can you be better?
Yep.
Ask him, how can you be better? And that's what I would always ask John. John, this is the area I'm struggling with. How am I thinking wrong? How can I be better in this? And then be quiet. But you need to seek out those, because the only way you're going to get stuck from where you are is to get somebody that can get that handle and pull it out. Because you can't, if you're sitting in the cargo and you're not moving, you can't go anywhere. So that's the thing.
You got to have somebody to help pull that wagon.
You do.
So I want to talk a minute. You told me just right before we started recording, you told me that the audiobook's coming out in a few weeks. And podcast listeners, listen to me. You need to go get the book today. This is a Maxwell Leadership published book. John Maxwell did the foreword. Don Yaeger, a thought leader, helped with some of the storytelling. But this is a book that will help you take the components of your life to build an incredible vehicle of effectiveness called your leadership. It's the Little Red Wagon, and we all have one. And we all have a wagon that needs to be pulled at times, and a wagon to where we need to realize the importance of each of the components. The book's going to help you. But I got to tell you, after you get the book, and I want you to get it today, wait for the audio book, because not only did Ron get a little emotional, as I love it when you get emotional about your family, but you've got John Maxwell reading in the book.
Yeah.
But of any other audio book that we know of, you have something unique. You have 2 contributors to this audio book that we don't know that they've ever collaborated on something. Tell me about that story, because I think it's awesome.
I don't think that they have. So one of my, John Maxwell's my favorite. One of my favorite people, and but also one of my favorite people, being in public service in the past, is Ronald Reagan.
Oh yeah,
and one of the great speeches that he ever made, in my opinion, I know he had Gorbachev tear down this wall, but on the 75th anniversary of the invasion at Normandy, where we really turned the World War II around, he went there and did a speech on the boys of Pointe du Hoc. Pointe du Hoc sat out on the very edge of Omaha Beach, and these boys had to climb this cliff that was perpendicular, right, to the ocean. So it was straight up, and they were led by a Texan, Colonel Rudder. And the speech is incredible. And so I'm doing my audio book, and I'm reading the speech, which is, it is a speech, so it's incredible. But then I got to thinking, let's see if President Reagan would do that for us. Now, President Reagan's been passed away for a long time, and we don't believe in some of the stuff about, that maybe Nancy believed in. But we were able to go out and get that audio clip of him because it was in the public domain. So I have John Maxwell and Ronald Reagan, when you listen to the audio book, will be talking to you about the Little Red Wagon.
I love this. So again, I'm going to challenge our listeners, our viewers, please pick up the book today. Life Lessons from the Little Red Wagon by Ron Simmons, but also go grab the audiobook. I cannot wait to get a project that has Ronald Reagan, one of the best communicators, in my opinion, in the political world, and John Maxwell, one of the best communicators in the same. Hey, do me a favor. I'm going to close in just a moment with a listener comment. I love our listeners. But right now, we have people out there that don't realize the significance of the things that they have in their life. Perhaps some of them feel like they've got a flat wheel, no wheel at all on their red wagon. Just give them a little bit of hope of what you think this book will give them when they pick it up.
Well, I think it'll give you, first of all, it'll give you a path, okay? And we, as we say, this is not just stories. It also takes those stories and teaches lessons from it. And it gives, at the end of each deal, it gives you an action, a consideration, and a takeaway at each end of those chapters that we came up with. So it tells you how an everyday person, whether you're a guy or a gal, is able to take the next uncomfortable step towards success. And so that's this book's probably not going to appeal to Tiger Woods, okay? But it's going to appeal to the Ron Simmons and the Mark Coles out there. And there's a lot more of them out there than there are the others. And nothing against those. Listen, if I could hit a golf ball like him, you and I might not be talking today, right?
Yeah, there's some people that live above the law of gravity or the law of practice, right?
Yes,
you mentioned two names that absolutely do that, Tiger Woods and John Maxwell. But then there's the rest of us that understands that success comes through some of the uncomfortable times of life. And when you told me that before we started recording, said, I want to challenge people to take the next uncomfortable step. There's a lot of books out there that will challenge us to take the next easy step, the next comfortable step.
It doesn't.
That's not it. This is getting you, those of us that are stuck in the same place for some time because we've not realized that it's going to take the uncomfortable to get us out of it. It's going to take going back to the things that make us that we wish were different, but making those things that we wish were different actually our friend to take that next step.
And one of the things that I did with that, Mark, is, and I don't know if I was born this way or just trained my mind. What I would do when I thought about that uncomfortable step is I was concerned sometimes about what might not happen, but I really focused on what it was going to look like on the other side.
Yep.
What was that victory going to look like on the other side? I didn't always get it, but I'll tell you what, I got a lot more times than I didn't, and it was just as sweet as I thought it would be.
You have totally done what John and I felt you would do when we partnered with you on this book. You have come into this studio, you have reached into the lives and the hearts of all of our listeners and provided hope that there can be progress even in the uncomfortable. So I want you, podcast listeners, podcast viewers, pick up the book, Life Lessons from the Little Red Wagon, 15 Ways to Absolutely Take Charge of Your Life and the lives of those around you and create a path to success. Hey, this podcast is all about bringing powerful, positive change. We partner with people like Ron, people like you. We bring them together because we believe that connection is what makes the change, because everyone deserves to be led well. We'll see you again next week.